All right, some of you may have not have realized there was an actual human being named Joost, but here he is, Joost de Valk. He's an entrepreneur, software developer from Viken, Netherlands. I said that right, didn't I?
Almost.
Almost. All right. Well, my ancestors are from just about 8 hours or 800 kilometers away down in Salzburg. So I thought I'd get close to that pronunciation, but best known obviously by most of you on the call today for the Yoast SEO plugins and tools and empire now, frankly, that surround all things SEO. So he's the founder and chief product officer of his own company called Yoast. So Yoast, thanks for joining us.
My absolute pleasure, John.
All right, so let's get the obvious out of the way. As some people can see in your screen, Yoast is spelled Joost, yet the company is spelled Yoast. And I know there's a story behind that, and I'll ask you to share it.
Yeah, that story is very simple. I was speaking at SMX Stockholm. This is we're talking end of 2000s, 2008, 2009, somewhere there. And I was speaking to a friend of mine, most of you probably have heard of, called Rand Fishkin.
Sure.
At that time of SEO Moz, later Moz, and now SparkToro. And well, Rand and I had just met, and he was asking, like, how do I pronounce your name? Because literally every English person that sees my name says Joost. And well, that's not my name, because my name's Joost. And so I pronounce it again for him, and he goes, oh, so it's toast with a Y. And I was like, yeah, that is what it is. And I turned around and looked whether I could buy Yoast.com. Yoast.com was taken, but I persisted and bought the domain name a couple months later and moved my .nl blog that I had, which was already written in Dutch or in English, sorry. Moved that over to Yoast.com, and well, the rest is history.
So that's a little bit like me. If you look at the last spelling of my last name, it's got all those German consonants thrown together. And so I tell people it's Jantsch like pants. So you certainly say it's Yoast like toast, right?
Yeah. Yeah, when I see your last name, I go like, it's Jantsch.
Exactly. It's certainly where in your part of the world, that's how somebody would introduce me for sure. Yeah. All right, so let's just get it out of the way right off the bat. What's the biggest thing you're watching right now in SEO? What do you think is the most exciting thing happening right now in SEO?
The most exciting thing, well, there's a lot happening and not all that much at the same time. So in terms of technical stuff, I think that the biggest thing that's happening right now is the constant growth of what schema does and how schema powers all sorts of results on all sorts of web engines, from Google, that is obviously working hard on it, to search engines outside of that, where Yandex and Russia and others are doing really cool stuff with schema. But also companies like Pinterest and others that parse schema and do nice things with it. So from a technical perspective, I think that is the biggest change at the moment. At the same time, if I look at my decks from 10 years ago on large site SEO, not all that much has changed.
Yeah.
It's still about information architecture. It's still about writing proper content. And actually, especially the white hat SEO part of things, where you don't really do stupid tricks, but you try to play by the rules, it's not really changed.
Yeah.
It's just Google is slowly getting better at understanding that content.
Yeah.
And it's getting better and better at doing that in more languages than just English. But at the same time, you still need to spoon feed it some stuff. And a lot of the stuff that you see consultants do when they come into a website would be the things that I would do 10 years ago when I stepped into websites.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the things like metadata and whatnot, just hasn't really changed.
Yeah, and cleaning up and making sure that a site doesn't have a ton of 404s and stuff like that. Yeah. A lot of site maintenance is usually lumped in with SEO.
Yeah.
And I hate it when people do that, because it should just be site maintenance.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more important as sites are becoming bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Over time, these things grow. I mean, Yoast.com is now, what is it, 13 years old or something, and has a lot of content because of that. Well, the same goes for your sites, I guess.
It's 18 years for Duct Tape Marketing. Yeah.
Yeah. So and I remember reading that when I started in my career, and probably some of the stuff that you wrote back then is still on there, and not all of it might be up to date.
Oh, I guarantee you that.
and that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we have right now, that it is actually getting harder and harder to maintain those sites and to keep them, well, healthy and up to date and good.
So since you mentioned it, I hear this all the time, and I'm curious what you tell people. Of course, we know what the answer is, but so a lot of the black hat stuff, we don't have to mention what all the whole list is. It works. Some of it still. I mean, it's getting depreciated. It's getting whacked. But then you run across companies that are doing all kinds of spammy things, and it works. So what do you tell people that are saying, "Hey, I want to play by what I think the long-term rules are gonna be, but yet here my competitors are, cheating, so to speak, and ranking above me"? I mean, what's the response to that type of question?
It depends a bit. Honestly, if what their competitor is doing is really egregious, what I usually do is just ping one of my friends at Google.
Okay, but that doesn't count because not everybody can do that.
Well, at the same time, you can. They do report. Yeah. They do act quite quickly on spam reports that are clearly violations. But a lot of it is not.
And on your Google My Business pages, you can actually suggest a change.
Yeah.
When somebody's title stuffing.
But it's also the thing is with Black Hat these days, the real Black Hat stuff, it works, but it works for a couple months only, usually.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just have to wait it out.
Yeah. Let me shift gears to WordPress. You were probably, at least in my view, one of the earliest promoters of Gutenberg and the whole block, system. And yet probably the only plugin downloaded more than Yoast SEO is the original editor plugin. So where do you stand these days on Gutenberg, non-Gutenberg, all the editors, visual editors?
Honestly, it's not downloaded and not used more than Yoast SEO, which is good. Now, Yoast SEO currently runs on the free version runs on like 11.5 million websites, and the classic editor plugin that you're referring to is on, I think, about 3 million.
Okay. Still the points valid.
It is, it is a lot of people. And honestly, when Gutenberg was released, it wasn't entirely done.
Yeah.
And I think people felt that pain. And I do think right now that Gutenberg is the best web editor out there. That doesn't mean it doesn't have bugs, and it doesn't mean that it's not sometimes terribly annoying. But I think it's the best thing right now for building web content.
Yeah.
And I say specifically not just writing, because I think what it does so well with its blocks is build web content. We're very close ourselves to releasing some new blocks that'll show the power of what you can do in Gutenberg even more. Because when I talk about schema, for instance, in Gutenberg, I can build editing environments where I can actually make you put in the fields that you want to put in and make you throw them around in ways that you want to throw them around in and still know what you've put in. So I can use it in the schema as well. So I can build recipes and job pages and FAQs and how-tos that are good looking and that you can play with in your editor. But I still also know what each of those fields are and tie that back to the schema. Because as smart as Google says it is, and often is in how it parses text, it really needs that schema to pull all of that data out. So I truly believe that Gutenberg is great. I do also believe that as a WordPress community, of which I consider myself a part as well, we have a team working on WordPress core full time.
Yep.
As a WordPress community, we managed that transition very poorly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's always the age-old problem is the best web editor is the one you know how to use already for a lot of people. And I think that's the real challenge, isn't it?
That is the challenge. And it is in many ways, if the classic editor worked for you and did what it needed to do for you, that's fine.
Yeah, yeah.
But to be honest, in the long run, if your competitors are going to use Gutenberg and are going to build better web experiences with it, then you're going to lose. That's why I think that in the long run, you'll need Gutenberg and you'll need to play with that. And we're doing some things with Gutenberg that I don't think you could do in the classic editor in any way. So we have some stories. If you Google Yoast open source story, for instance, we have a story on open source there that is like a long page of everything that we think and say about open source in all sorts of different formats and things. And we really only used what Gutenberg can do, but it looks so much better than you could ever build something in the classic editor.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm still a big fan. Does that mean that it's without fault? Absolutely not.
So let's shift to backlinks. Backlinks, they were core, in the early days, have always been important signal for Google. How do you feel that they have evolved, or the use of them by Google has evolved, and then consequently, us as marketers, as SEO folks, need to be thinking about them right now?
They still have their value, and I'm not going to deny that. And I think that as much as I wish SEOs would talk differently about them,
yeah,
that doesn't mean that you don't need them. The problem I see with the way people talk about links is that they talk about acquiring links instead of talking about getting good press or getting good marketing or getting a story out.
Right.
And nothing in what we do is really new. I mean, this is PR that we've been doing for decades. A lot of the stuff that we do in marketing is not new. It's just in stuff from the 1920s in a new shape. And I don't think that's different here. I think that what you need to do as a company is have a good story and have a vision and a mission of what you should be doing, and then have the product to back it up. So whether that's a product or a service or whatever, I think it's really hard these days to actually have a shitty product and get away with it. But if you do all that and you do it right and you tell that story and you spread that story and you build your brand, then I don't think you'll ever have to worry about links.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've never had to worry about links to Yoast.com. Never. And I've honestly never done any real link building for it. But that's because I built a brand. And that brand is more important than a whole lot of other things.
So you recently wrote a very comprehensive post about the alt image attribute. And that's one of those that some people love it. Some people think, oh, it's a little thing. You know, maybe you get a little something in a very competitive. But you seem to, I've seen you write about that attribute before. So you seem to have a fondness for it. Tell me what you think about, you know, why you would dedicate an entire post to what's a seemingly small factor.
Well, one, because it's small, but it's also important.
Mm-hmm.
As much as we would like to think otherwise, unless you put it in text on an image, Google is not going to understand what's on an image. And I'm also a very big proponent of thinking about accessibility properly.
Mm-hmm.
Which
is what that was created for, right?
yeah, and which is why I think that the alt tag or alt attribute should be just filled correctly.
Yeah.
At the same time, is it super important? No. SEO is about doing 1,000 little things right.
Right.
And not about doing the one thing that is going to be the end all be all of everything. And of course, there are different things that are more and less important. So your title tag is going to be more important than the alt tag on that, or alt attribute on that image.
Yeah.
But I do try and get everything right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the free SEO. Well, it's actually in the paid as well, but in the SEO, Yoast SEO primary plugin, one of the elements that I see a lot of people wrestle with is like, what do I do with this focus keyword? So as the creator of this tool, how would you advise somebody thinking about the focus keyword and what its importance is in optimization in general?
So the focus keyword itself is of course not a signal or anything.
Right.
It is a writing aid. It is the thing that you want to rank for. That is what you should put in there, and then it will help you improve that. And honestly, people need help sometimes to do that, and just need help to get their content cohesive enough that a search engine can actually grasp it. Yeah. And the funny thing is, so we have a quite large team. Not a whole lot of people realize how many people work at Yoast, but we're about 120 people now, of which we have about 10 language scientists who do nothing else than look at language all day and add new support for more languages and improve all of our readability, SEO scoring, etc. If you talk to them and we look together at the algorithms that Google publishes for how they work with content and how they can grab topics from content, etc., it becomes very clear that the simpler you make that text, or the more easy to read you make that text, the better a search engine will be able to grasp the topic. And that's why we still do that, why we still focus on a lot of that. And I know that a lot of SEOs want us to move away from that, and also want us to move away from terms like keyword density. Mm-hmm. Because they say, yeah, that's not valid anymore. And I'm like, well, saying it's not valid is also an oversimplification. Right. And in English, it's different from other languages, which is why we have different algorithms for different languages. But at the same time, you can't rank for stuff that's not on your page. You still today can't do that. You can't rank for something that is a synonym of what you want to rank for as much as you want to if there's any competition. So it still matters that you write about the thing that you want to rank for. And I see the question that come in the chat that I think is actually funny, because it's one of the things that basically always comes up. Whether can we go to a score from 0 to 100? Well, that score is already there. We don't display it for a reason, because when I do, people will go optimize for 92 to 95, and that's useless. Go put your time into getting something that's 30 to 70, but don't optimize for it going from 92 to 95, because you're not going to see the difference anywhere ever. And none of the algorithms of any of the SEO tools out there, including our own, is good enough that we can actually say scientifically 92 is better than 95. I can't prove that to you. So that's just not worth it. So that's why we still use our system of red, orange, and green. We are looking at whether all of the checks, and we do this constantly. So we're constantly looking at, and hey, we are adding checks, removing some stuff, changing the weighting. We are looking at whether we should make a more simplified version, even, because as happens with these things, you get bloated over time, because the hardest thing in software development is taking stuff out. So we're looking at that. I'm not sure where we'll go with that yet, because it's actually hard to do that.
Yeah, you probably get countless feature requests, don't you?
We do, yeah. It's and funnily enough, I probably put in almost just as much myself.
Yeah. All right, I've got one more question for you that I want to pose, and then so I invite anybody on the line today. If you've got a question, you can either put it in there and I'll call on you, but I'd love it if you unmute your camera, your mic, and whatnot if you want to ask Joost a question. We have Duct Tape Marketing has a partnership with SEMRush, and a lot of our consultants use the tool. You just recently, and I must admit I haven't studied it that deeply, but you just recently did an integration with some of SEMRush data. So do you want to talk a little bit about that in case people aren't familiar with it?
Yeah, so what we've added is we've added a feature where if you have a focus keyword, you can look up related keywords to that, so that you can simply find those using the SEMrush API. And honestly, it's the first step of more ideas that we have on working together. We've become good friends. The partnership was well received by a lot of people. So we're seeing that a lot of existing SEMrush users connected their accounts to their Yoast SEO as well. So there's a whole lot of back and forth there. That is really just very good to see. And it's I think we can do a lot of cool things with bringing their data into WordPress and help people improve their website faster and make things like keyword research, etc., a bit more accessible.
Yeah.
At the same time, it works reasonably well for English and some of the other languages, but not for all of them.
Yeah.
And our mission is SEO for everyone, and that also stands for a lot of languages. We're really going for a very large coverage of language groups. We're Dutch ourselves by our heritage, and Dutch is small, and so there's very little keyword data and stuff like that. So tools like SEMrush are not as effective in those smaller language areas usually.
Yeah, makes sense.
But honestly, for everyone in the English-speaking parts of the world, I use it myself. I like the integration. It's simple. It's very effective. It's great to use.
All right. So what, I see David asked a question, but I think Yoast addressed it already on the
Yeah,
scoring.
I addressed that one. Yeah.
Yeah. So what questions you guys want to ask Yoast? I told you that you gave the opportunity. So Michael Miller, you want to, jump in there, or James, either one of you, both of you.
Sure, we'll do it at the same time. Yeah. You talked about this a little bit. Contextual search versus the focus on keywords. I'm just would love to hear you say a little bit more about that, because I mean, going back 18 months, 2 years ago, everything I was reading was keywords are not going to be that important anymore. It's all about context and focus on that. But all of the systems, Yoast and the other ones included, still are all built around nailing that keyword, the keyword density, making sure it's in the right places. Was that incorrect? Or are keywords not becoming less important and context isn't as big a deal? Or are we just not moving to address that? I'm just curious.
Well, so I think that one very important thing to remember is that as search engines evolve and get better at understanding content, and understanding the contexts within in which people search, etc. People still use keywords to search, and the results are adapted to the keywords that people search for, and that's why you have to adapt your pages to it. There is really no other way in information retrieval than to do it like that. At least for Google, there's no other way. There might be another search engine that comes around the corner at some point and does it completely differently. But Google's systems are so huge that they won't change overnight. And that's also why links still matter, why PageRank somewhere is still in that algorithm, even though nobody talks about that as much anymore. But it's still a part of that. They're building and building and building on top of existing methods. They're not doing away with that because they can't. It's a continuous improvement system. And I do think that context is very important. And there was a lot of talk about it a couple of years ago, but funnily enough, in Europe, we'd had the discussion about TF, IDF a decade ago. And a lot of that stuff is very important to know, I think, if you're working in search every day. So it's important that you realize how term frequency works and how that relates to large data sets. And for everybody who thinks that what Yoast SEO does around that is too simple, you should look at our code. Because honestly, we do a full TF IDF analysis on your site, and we use that to power our internal linking suggestions. We do all that stuff. We know how all that stuff works, and then we decide to really make it as simple as we can so that it's understandable for everyone, and not just for SEOs. And so that's a choice, and a very, honestly, a very specific one. We choose to make this accessible for everyone, and sometimes by doing that, we might be oversimplifying it for you. But don't think that because our interface is simple, that what we do is simple, because it is really, really is not. And it is, as I said, we have like 10 language scientists working on this stuff. The first language scientist we hired was 5 years ago. She literally, just this week, we celebrated her being at the company for 5 years. Nobody was talking about it 5 years ago in that way, but we were thinking about it. We were thinking about readability, and you'll see if you look up our posts about stuff like readability ranks, etc., that we've been doing that for a long time. We really want people to focus on writing better text for the web, because it's easier to understand by humans, but it's also really easier to understand for search engines.
Let's go to another question. I think, James, you were the second one that turned on your camera there.
So first of all, Joost, I have to compliment you on I'm actually, my parents immigrated from the Netherlands to Canada, and they've been here for almost 50 years, and they have a much more discernible accent than you do. So I have to compliment you on your English.
Thank you.
My question for you is I had this email from a client of mine yesterday. I'm building him a website, and essentially starting with messaging, making sure we understand who their customer is and what messaging will resonate with them. But he asked me this. He said, I know what SEO is, but I have no vision into how it really works. What type of SEO company would best fit us? What do they do? Average cost related, etc. Essentially, I need a lesson on it all, not the War and Peace version, more of SEO for Dummies version. How would you answer that?
Well, we have Yoast SEO Academy on Yoast.com with free SEO courses that you can start with to learn about that stuff. And honestly, it depends on how much time you have more than anything else. I think that for a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, SEO is important and should definitely be a part of what they do in marketing. But whether they have the time to learn and do that themselves is really up to them and up to how important the web is in their strategy. And oftentimes I would say that hiring someone to help you with that is not a bad idea. At the same time, where it really mostly goes wrong is if people don't do their own keyword research. So if they don't think for themselves about what they should be it should be found for, and what people and what is important, and keyword research is a skill that you need a bit of time to learn, but it's not that hard in the end. But it does take. There's a couple of oohs and ahs that you do the first time that you really do keyword research and are taken through that by someone who knows the ropes. And it's specifically about using the wording that your customers would use and not the wording that you yourself use. So often do I run into people still deciding on the name for their product because of what they like instead of what people search for.
Yeah, keyword research is almost akin to strategy, for
yeah.
marketing.
No, I think that the steps that you should take should go from, okay, so what's the mission and vision of my company?
Yeah.
What's the brand that I want to put out there? And then, okay, so if I want to be found by people, what are the words that I should be using to describe my brand and my business? And
Peter,
then after everything after that, I think you can outsource.
I often tell people you need to know enough about SEO to be able to buy it if you don't want to do it yourself, so you don't get ripped off by folks.
It is very easy to get ripped off, and unfortunately, we have a lot of snake oil in our industry still. And yeah, I mean, we don't sell consultancy ourselves. We've played a lot with opening up something like a directory of SEO companies, but it would soon become too large as well. So it's hard.
Just send them to us. Just fine. We'll take care of them. Peter, I think you had a question.
Yeah, thanks, Joost, for joining us today. And hoe gaat het?
Yeah, very good. I thought I spotted another Dutch last name there.
So I know, within I'm brand new to Duct Tape Marketing, by the way, so I'm still learning. But I know that John, you're really promoting WordPress, and of course, Joost, that's the space that you work in. Our agency, we landed on a different platform years ago, and the discussion that we have with some of our clients, they compare us with things like Squarespace and Wix. And I always tell them what the product that we use, and it's actually built on Concrete 5. It's a smaller CMS system, but it's we're really good at it, and we really like how it works. What is your opinion on some of those cookie cutter websites as far as it comes to search visibility and SEO?
It really depends on every platform. Some of them are pretty good. Some of them definitely are not. But all of them will get better. You mentioned Squarespace and Wix. Those are both huge companies. I mean, I was looking at it recently because Shopify put out the number that they're going to hire 2,021 engineers in the year 2021. And I was looking at, okay, so if they're that big, how big is Wix really? And it turns out Wix employs over 3,000 people as well.
Yeah.
I can tell you that WordPress is built by maximum 200 people, and most of them are not full-time. And even though that's true, the plugin ecosystem, et cetera, is a lot bigger. So more is happening and more is available for WordPress and for other systems. But I think it's impossible to compete with that in the long run in a good way. So Shopify and Wix and Squarespace will keep on growing and will keep on becoming better because they're making a lot of money and they're pouring it back into a product. Yeah. Not all of them are good from an SEO perspective. But I also don't want to say that all of them are bad because that's not fair anymore. It used to be, but it's certainly not true anymore. Do I still think that WordPress is one of the best systems out there in terms of SEO out of the box? Yeah, I think so. If you install a certain SEO plugin, then I think it is about as good as it gets. But others will get closer to that.
Do you ever see a point where you're developing add-ons for other platforms, Joost?
We already do, yeah. So we support a couple of other platforms and we're working on more. But that's also just a case of, hey, we've got 120 families that depend on Yoast for their livelihoods, literally. So I don't want to depend on purely WordPress. As large as WordPress is, yeah. You need a contingency plan.
Kevin, did you have a question?
Yeah, John, thanks. My question is for someone who works exclusively with local businesses, how do we take advantage of traffic we're getting from content that we write that's not local? Just as an example, I have a piano tuner in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and we have a featured snippet for best sheet music apps for piano. And he gets thousands of hits a month for that. None of them are from Fort Wayne. And I have many examples like that where we have great success and the client's happy with this lovely featured snippet they have and they love these vanity metrics with the traffic, but it's not local traffic. It's good content and it helps the authority of their site and it generates backlinks, but it doesn't necessarily translate into results for a local business. What do I do with that?
Well, I think the challenge there is turning that authority into local authority in terms of not just local maps or anything, but real local authority. And hey, this person is great at pianos. Look, the entire world is quoting him and using that in your PR strategy locally to get local press, etc. Because well, this does happen. You get traffic for stuff that really maybe doesn't make all that much sense. We used to rank number 2 for Google Analytics because we used to have a Google Analytics plugin, and I can tell you that 99.9999% of the people searching for Google Analytics in Google was not searching for us. So even though we get a lot of clicks, they weren't searching for us. They were just doing that navigational search. And so a lot of the people that see those featured snippets are not looking for you. They're just looking for an answer to their question. But how can you make the fact that you are the best answer to that question? How can you use that to your advantage in the long term is a very interesting question that you can play with. Like, hey, how many people got access to your site? How can you use that in local PR saying, hey, look at this piano player gets more traffic to his website than the local news site because, and you and use that in your PR stories. I think that's probably the most powerful thing you can do with it.
And maybe run some AdSense on the page or something there.
Yeah, well, you can always try that, but honestly,
I finally convinced him to sign up for the affiliate program from some of these sheet music apps, and he's making a little money off that. But it's, you know,
well, that is, I mean, there's nothing wrong with money like that on the side. If it's a good program, it can make you a lot of money in the long term. But yeah, and don't discount the Amazon affiliate program. For a lot of these things, doing Amazon on those links usually works better than a whole lot of other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll take one more question from Dennis, and then we'll wrap up today. I think Dennis, did you want to ask something?
Thank you, John. Hello, Joost. One of the biggest thorns in my side is speed fixes. And usually the things that you can do that don't get expensive are speed caching plugins and like that. So I'm wondering, how important is our focus on speed fixes, and how important are they to our success?
I'm afraid you're not going to like my answer. I think it's paramount, and only will get more important over time. I do also think that there's a very simple solution for basically every website out there, and it's called Cloudflare. Mm-hmm. And every plugin or whatever thing you do on WordPress pales in comparison. So I don't have, I'm not an affiliate. In fact, I'm a paying customer. We pay them far too much money every month. But it is ridiculous what Cloudflare can do for relatively small amounts of money to a website. So for a couple of dollars a month, and Eliza just wrote it in the chat. Yes, Cloudflare. It's one word.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
I would put that in front of a site, configure that well. They have if you're on WordPress, they have a new application specific optimization thing for WordPress where they do incredibly nice WordPress optimization. And then you can run on a relatively cheap hosting package with Cloudflare in front of it. You can make sites so fast.
Yeah, and
good information. Thank you.
There's actually a free version if you got a pretty low traffic.
Yeah.
Low traffic.
Yeah, but honestly, if you're spending time on it, spending less than $50 a month on the hosting of your site in total, if you're spending your own time on that site more than an hour a year, please spend the money on hosting and a Cloudflare account. It's absolutely worth it.
Totally agree. I have all of my sites there. Joost, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's probably getting late there where you are, so I appreciate it.
It is close to 11 p.m. Yes.
Yeah. So I certainly appreciate it, and I know everyone else does, and appreciate the work that you've done. You've made WordPress a better place to hang out.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for the kind words. Thanks for having me, and see you all soon.
Thank you, Yoast.